Well, we're going to stretch it to lots of comments.
Don't stretch it. Do whatever.
No, it's just,
Very consolidated.
okay, well, we're running behind.
They were done. These lessons were done to be done in a week.
In a week. We'll just see what happens. Here comes somebody. What is her name? Been there for Dick. I cannot remember. Huh? Okay. Okay. Well, it looks like we're all in. Sydney, do you pray? You don't pray? I know you prayed. You prayed in public? Okay. Sydney, would you open our class?
Dear Lord, thank you for the blessings of another day. Thank you for allowing us to get here safely. I pray that you be with each of us in our hearts and our minds. Help us to be open to your word. Give us wisdom and understanding. Dear Lord, be with us through this class. We thank you so much for the church that you've given us and the glimpse of heaven that we get through these wonderful, wonderful women. All this in Jesus I pray.
Amen. Okay, let's open our books to page 36. Rebecca, and if I say Sarah, y'all just roll on. Because when I was typing, I typed Sarah and go, oh, we're not studying Sarah, we're studying Rebecca. Also, open to Genesis 24. We'll read a few scriptures out of that. The biblical account of Rebecca is interesting, and the more I studied it, it's one of those stories where accounts that you want to know more. You want to know more details, more of what they were thinking, and we just don't know it all. And I think our gospel meeting preacher said that we don't have a lot of things. Our accounts in the Old Testament and even they're very factual, and there's a lot of things that aren't in there that we just don't know, and we can't make them up. But we can say possibly this or that, but we just don't know. And when I study these women, I try to put myself into their place and think, what would I do if I were in their place? And sometimes I think I might have made the same mistakes they did. We don't know what we would have done in these situations. And the background of her entrance into the account is so interesting because it starts out as the author of this lesson has divided it into how wonderful Rebecca is and to how that changed with her deceit and her sin. And so the background of it is that Abraham wanted a wife for his son from his people, not the nations around them. Isaac was now 40 and Sarah had been dead for 3 years. He sent his oldest servant, and I'm going to tell you right now, I put Eliezer because I just knew that was in the story. It's not. It says his oldest servant, but at one point he was talking to God about my heir being my servant Eliezer. So, but that's not what this story says. Before Isaac was born, he said, God, I don't have anybody, and my heir right now is my servant Eliezer. But this one just says his oldest servant. And whoever this oldest servant was must have been a godly man, because Abraham sent him back to his relatives in Nahor. And this trip probably took 3 to 8 weeks with camels. So it wasn't a quick little trip to go find a wife. It probably took him 3 to 8 weeks with the camels. He was very plain to not take Isaac with him. Go find a wife. Promise me you'll go find Isaac a wife. Promise me you won't take Isaac. And that when if you cannot find a wife in that land for Isaac, then you don't have to find one. You'll be relieved of your promise. So this servant heads out to do this. And the first, on page 36, the first couple of things about Rebecca says that, number one, a lovely and refreshing young wife. The first section, very italic, is she was very fair to look upon. And the second one says she was hospitable, courteous, and kind. So the servant prayed before he got there that God, when he asked for a drink and the woman gave it to him, that she would also draw water for his camels until they were finished drinking. If you go to Genesis 24, verse 18, Genesis 24, verse 18. Katrina, are you there?
Sure.
Read 18 through 20 for me, please.
Okay. So she said, "Drink, my lord." Then she quickly let her pitcher down to her hand and gave him a drink. And when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, "I will draw water for your camels also, until they have finished drinking." Then she quickly emptied her pitcher into the trough, ran back to the well to draw water, and drew for all his camels.
Okay. So she offered to draw water for the camels. The account tells us he had 10 camels on this journey. It's a lot of camels. It's a lot of water. So it says she ran back to the well, and at one point it says when she came up with the water. So if she drew water for 10 camels, and I cut this down from what it said online some, it's estimated that they could drink 30 gallons at a time. That's 300 gallons of water. And it says in verse 16, right before what Katrina read, she went down to the well and came up. These wells possibly had stairs that you were going down into the well. We waiting on somebody or just Karen? Wait a minute. Oh, Karen. Okay. Oh, Karen. Come in, Karen. So 30 gallons at a time for each camel, that's 300 gallons. If she carried 5 gallons a trip, that's 60 trips to get water. If she did that half of it, that's 30 trips to get water for these camels. And it says at this point, Rebecca was ready and willing to do the heavy lifting because she had the heart of a servant. And we see that in her at the beginning. The next section says she was hardworking and not lazy. And this proves it. You know, I couldn't carry 2 gallons very far anymore. So it made me think of the verse in Colossians 3:23 and 24 that says, "And whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ." She wasn't doing it for this man. She was just that generous and hardworking. She had no idea at this point who this man was. She was just being kind. And then the next section says she was full of life and bubbling with zeal. I can tell you, no one has ever said that I bubbled with zeal. That's just not me. But she had noticed in this text, the author, that she ran to get water. She ran to tell her family. She ran to meet Isaac, her future husband. She was just one of those that was ready to go and excited about what was next. And I think we see that so much in, she just was ready to go with the servant back to meet Isaac. She was ready. And when her mother and her brother tried to delay the trip, and they said, stay a few days, which if you think about that, and then with what happens later, you know, with Jacob, when Laban's like, oh, just stay a few more years. Oh, now you have to stay 7 more years. And now you have to, you know, that was kind of their habit. And she said, no, I will go. She was just ready to go. The next point that is in our book says that she was adventurous and willing to take new steps in her life. She said, I will go. And she did. And comments on, do you think this was partly because the servant had told her she was an answer to the prayers he had prayed to God to find a wife for Isaac, and she had done what he had asked God to show him, and that she was the answer to that prayer. Any thoughts on that?
I know that it's not a direct comparison because it's not the same culture, but I'm thinking if a strange man who I didn't know came and said, "You're the answer to my prayers and you need to come back with me to this foreign land," I'd be like, "What are you trying to scam me out of?"
Yeah, exactly.
And if they said it about my child, Kinsey, I'd be like, "Absolutely not."
And who are you going to sell me to? And
Yeah.
I know.
And I know it was a different time and a different culture, but the faith that it took for her to go, especially when her family says, "Why don't you stay a couple days?"
Right.
And for her to be willing to part from her family and go because it was an answer to prayers is just such a huge
It really
thing
is.
to me.
It really is. And she likens this right here to the marriage where we say "I do" instead of "I will go." She committed at that point to be Isaac's wife and to enter into this union of God's design because she knew when she left she was marrying Isaac.
And that's the thing you were talking about in the beginning. That's the thing that I wonder about the decisions that Rebecca made. If she knew that God had chosen Isaac, you remember that was God's choice, that he would choose Isaac over Esau.
Oh, Jacob over Esau.
I mean,
yes,
Jacob
absolutely.
over Esau.
And I have struggled with that here because this author really condemns her on that.
I know, but these people seem to know about God's will more directly than what we do, and so I don't know if she knew, but the whole thing was of God,
Right.
and so if Rebecca had not done what she did,
There would, I agree. We're going to get there. Because this is the half where Rebecca's just wonderful. She's beautiful and she's doing everything that you can tell that she thinks God wants of her. She meets Isaac. Yes, I'm sorry. I saw your hand. We'll go into
That's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was also going to say something about what Rita did, but I also believe from what Katrina said, I kind of got the idea through all the years, I don't know why, that she knew who Abraham was.
Well, yes.
Because that was a kinsman, and Abraham sent her to the kinsman. So he was I would imagine, a very well-known person that followed God.
It was just, and you wonder how much news they got, being it was such a long trip.
Yeah.
But this was the chart I had. And here's Rebecca and Isaac. This is how they're related right here. So, yes, it goes all the way back to Abram, Nahor, which she came down through that lineage. Her father was Bethuel, and Laban and Rebecca are here, Isaac. So, yes, they probably did know who they were.
And that he was following God's request so that...
With the gifts he gave her, she knew he was wealthy.
Yeah.
And had means. So, she may have been, I'm ready to go out and find out what life has in store for me, and if this is God's will, I'm all in. That very well could be. And this tells us that she was modest. She put the veil over her face. She went to meet Isaac, ran to meet Isaac. The servant tells Isaac the story, and it says he took her as wife, and he loved her. And I read that was unusual, but I don't know that it was. God told, one husband, one wife. And he loved her, and that she comforted him in the grief of his mother. These two elements are very important in a marriage. The comforting, the love. Years ago, I read a book that said when you're first married and you're not, maybe you haven't made that bond as much with your husband. And this woman in this book was saying she knew that her marriage had bonded when, in her grief, she turned to her husband instead of her mother for that comfort. and that she knew at that point that that's what she needed to do, and that's where her comfort came from, was from her husband. And then we go on. I don't know if we're going to finish or not. We're moving through pretty quick, so we might get this done in 1 week, but we need some comments. She went into, like many of these women, she was barren for the first 20 years of their marriage. So for 20 years, she was barren. Isaac pleaded with the Lord, and she conceived twins. We can ask Laura what that feels like.
I identify with that she felt them more fighting within her. So.
Yeah. And back then, you didn't have a sonogram at whatever 8 weeks and say, oh, there's 2 of them in there. And so for her to feel this, and she went and she asked directly to the Lord. And basically what she said is, if everything's okay, why am I feeling like this?
Well, and she had nothing to, I don't think she had anything to compare it to.
Well, true,
So
she
like,
had
obviously my experience, my twins felt vastly different than one.
True, but you had
like
had
you
that.
said, it does not feel normal. So
Right.
she probably did think something was very wrong.
Yes, and she asked directly of the Lord. And interestingly here, he answers her directly. He gives her a direct answer in Genesis 25:23. Maddie, can you read that for us? Is that right? Yep.
And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger.
Okay, so this goes back to what we were saying. She was told the older shall serve the younger. So in her decisions later, yes, she favored Jacob. But she may have been doing what Sarah was doing. Well, God said, so I'm going to make sure. I'm going to fix it.
Well, and here where she's, and I'm not criticizing the author, but it says, Rebekah became impatient with the promise of God and devised her own plan. Well, that's true in a sense, but Isaac had told Esau in her hearing, you go and I'm going to bless you with the blessings that the Lord had said are going to Jacob.
Right.
So, I mean, here she was. I don't know if this is, but obviously this is how God carried this out.
Right.
Because once he had given the blessing, there would be no reversing of it.
No, that was one thing that could not be taken back. It was irrevocable. You okay?
I don't know, more just a rambling, but God works in such mysterious ways, because I often struggled with the story or accounts of like Rahab. I mean, she lied, but yet it was to help God's people, and then you have this, and then Tamar's story, and just so many times I wonder if this doesn't somewhat fall in a little bit of that.
Yeah, and Rebecca lied and she deceived her husband, and that is true. But yet, we don't know, and this is where the Bible doesn't say, Rebecca was thinking that, you know, we don't know. We have to kind of wonder what she was doing at this point. One of the problems that I see here is, in my opinion, what they both did wrong was their partiality to their children. He had a favorite, she had a favorite. And they were partial to their children, each to the other. And I'm sure it was kind of obvious to the children, which I don't know, I don't understand that. I wasn't partial to one of mine, or I'll tell you different. Julie and I always joked all the time, my grandmother loved me better, and she did, and my grandfather loved Julie better. I mean, and that, it was very obvious that I was Mama's favorite, and she was Papa's favorite. And that's just the way it was, and we didn't care, you know, because we got our attention from the one, and we were good with it. But I feel like one of their biggest mistakes that they made was their partiality. to their children. Isaac favored the hunter, that was Esau, the manly part. Rebekah favored the younger son who stayed near the tents, which probably meant she spent a lot more time with him.
Where does that say that in the Bible?
Verse 28.
Yeah, about
Mine says Isaac loved Esau. Like he loved.
Yeah, yes, I know that, but where does it say that he stayed in close to her?
well, it's
27.
yeah,
It's dwelling in 10.
dwelling in tents. Now we're going to get to that soon. It's right there. Yeah, 25:27 says, so the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man dwelling in tents. If you're open to Genesis 25:27, what does that word mild say in your translation?
Mine says quiet.
Quiet? What?
Mine says plain.
Plain? Okay. Anybody else got anything different?
Quiet is same if we now say.
This word is, the definition is complete, plain, sound, quiet, or wholesome. So you could go so many directions with this word, and it is exactly the same word that is used when in Job it says Job was blameless. That's that same word in the Hebrew. So you're thinking, what did they mean by that word? Was it plain? Was it wholesome? Like, you read different articles, they're going to say, oh, Jacob was just such a, upright and blameless, just like Job was. I read that. No, he was, mild, meek, plain.
A mama's boy.
A mama's boy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But there's nowhere
It says he stayed in the tents. It said dwelling in the tents.
Wouldn't they all?
Well, he must have stayed in and Esau went out hunting. I don't know. And at this point, Esau has wives. So it was that patriarchal unit, where we're all living around in the same spot. Going back a little bit to the partiality, what struck me was how when we make a mistake sometimes with our parenting, which scares me, we pass that on generationally. Look at what Jacob then did with his partiality to Joseph. He was the favorite of mom. He saw the partiality. Then he turned around and Rachel's children he did the same thing, caused the problems with Joseph and Benjamin. And so a lot of times when we make mistakes as parents, it affects our future generations. That's what they know. And that's what seemed to be happening here. By this point in our story, Esau had already caused his parents grief with his 2 Hittite wives. And also, Isaac and Rebekah had lied to Abimelech about Rebekah being Isaac's sister.
The same as his father.
Yes, exactly like Abraham and Sarah had done because of her beauty. So we already have this, Isaac went along with that lie. In fact, he's the one that said, tell him that you're my sister. And so we already have this in play here. Page 39 says, her character was so weakened that she lied and deceived. This is where we kind of don't know the details. She did go into a lot of trouble to pull this off. And also at this point, Esau had already sold his birthright. And I looked into that. We may get to that, but I looked into that, and the birthright was more of the legal thing, the double portion of the father's things, the legality of who can become the patriarch. But you had to have the blessing. It was the more spiritual, divine, from God, and it could not be revoked once it was given. And so at this point, Esau had already proven that he had sold his birthright for food. And you had to be pretty hungry to give up a double portion of what Isaac had. And maybe when he popped off and said it, he didn't mean, he he may not have realized the consequences of that, what he said. Oh well, just, I'm gonna die anyway if you don't feed me, so.
Well, and I compare this to the same thing with Solomon being a king. Solomon was third
Yeah,
in the lineage
true.
to be king. And Absalom was killed. And Adonijah, is that his name?
Adonijah, I think, I don't know.
Adonijah was the rightful,
Uh-huh,
according to the,
right.
and Solomon, but when you said they had to have the blessings, remember David called him in and blessed
Blessed
him.
and blessed Solomon. And when they heard that, everybody kind of went, yeah, okay. One thing that I saw in Rebecca with her plans here, she convinced Jacob to go along. She did deceive, and she went into detail and a lot of trouble to do it with the goat's hair and the cooking the meat. And sometimes when we do things like this, did her plans turn out like she envisioned they would? I think in her mind, she was like, Jacob's got the birthright, Jacob's got the blessing, he's gonna stay here and take over. He's the favorite, you know, my favorite. He's gonna stay and become the patriarch of this. I don't think she envisioned he was gonna be gone for.
And when she sent him away, she said until Esau, but she was deprived of both boys. That part is definitely
Right.
true, because there's no record of her ever seeing him again.
No, there's not. Yeah, we're gonna get that. But she said a few days. The trip took weeks. So I'm thinking, well, but maybe she thought, oh, he'll go there and visit a little bit and come back. And there's no record. It was at least 20 years. At least. I read a couple of things that they think that 20 years is doubled. That verse that says 20 years, and then you add to it the 14 and the 6, so it may have been 40 years. And they say that article I read, and I didn't feel like doing the math. And so they said it lines up more with the ages if he was gone 40 years instead of just 20. But either way, then our next one says, where are we? It says her companionship with Isaac was a mere pretense. Maybe not. We don't know. It doesn't tell us. We know that they had enough of a relationship that she went to Isaac and said, we need to send Jacob away to find a wife. These wives have distressed me of Esau's and caused us grief, and let's send Jacob away to find a wife. And so they still had a relationship.
Well, and I don't think that there is scripture to verify that Rebecca once had the love of Isaac, but as they grew old in the same house, their hearts grew chasms apart.
I don't think
I
so.
see no evidence of that.
Yeah, I don't either. And I love this because we don't just take what we're reading for fact. We go find out. What does the Bible say? What do we think? What does it tell us? What does it not tell us? It doesn't really tell us that. And they had that relationship enough. They talked about sending Jacob away. Now, she had two different reasons for that. But one thing that I did think that comes into our homes today is that in our lives, and not like this time, but we have our kids for, let's say, 20 years. But our husbands and wives fill their lives with those children to the point when those kids are gone in 20 years, they don't know each other. They don't have a home, a marriage, because they focused so much on those kids. And I knew a girl in school, I was pretty good friends with her, and she told me, my parents are staying together till we leave home and then they divorce. And they did. And the minute she graduated from high school, they divorced. So we need to be careful in our marriages that once those kids are out of the home, we still have a relationship with our husband. But that, yes, Laura.
I just remember I was in college and I saw somebody, a friend of mine, she was a few years older, or she was, I think, a few years older, and she
posted something online about how everybody says your kids should come first after God, obviously. Your kids should come first, and you should love your kids. And it was this whole thing, and she said, no, you've got to put your husband first. And as a young college woman, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, that's awful. Like, she must not love her children. And so that stuck with me. And then as I grew older and had children, I see the wisdom and how important that is. And not only for your and your husband's sake, but for your kids to see what a godly relationship
Absolutely.
looks like. And if you put your children first over your spouse, they don't see that example of how God designed it.
And when they, and when they see that you are taking the time to keep that marriage strong, then they know it's important in their marriage. And that also lends itself to that. Another thing I noticed here, who had a comment? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
But in the same way, because we have both boys and a girl, obviously, and I look and we talk about it some and say, okay, am I the type of wife that I want my boys to have? And on the flip side, do we have the relationship that I want them to be able to model?
Right.
Is Andy the type of husband or dad that I want my boys to strive to be? And that's where we have to constantly be looking at ourselves in that.
Right. And that's, as God designed it, the two become one. You have to be a unit. And another thing I noticed here is that Rebecca did deceive her husband. And that can't be possible. And I mean, even to the point of you tell your husband everything, and if somebody says, I'm going to tell you something, but don't tell your husband, that I would tell him no. Don't tell me if you don't want John to know. Everything I know, he knows. Everything he knows, I know. The only thing, and when the girls were little, we'd say, don't ever hide anything from us or whatever. And so birthday gifts got hard. But you have to explain that. Fun surprises, for some, that's one thing. But you don't tell somebody, don't tell your husband. And that just wasn't something we did at all. We communicated everything, and he would tell me things, a lot of things, and I knew better than to repeat them. Don't just betray that trust either from your husband. In their positions at work or in the church, when they tell you something, you have to keep it. Don't give them a reason to not trust you when they tell you something. And so I see that as a breakdown here, and she did deceive Isaac. Maybe they didn't talk, or word is communicative, however you want to put that. I know it's kind of a buzzword, so you have to have communication, but it's very true. It's very true. You have to have that communication. Any comments on that? Okay. The next one says we change all the time. Where is that? And this is true. We change all the time. 41.
In the middle of 40, nothing is more certain than the fact that all of us
change all the time. Yes. And so, if that's true, as we grow older, we should be getting better. We should be improving in our relationship with God. And the verse that I put for that is, I think Weta likes this verse, 2 Corinthians 13:55. Examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Do you not know yourselves that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you are disqualified? As we age, we have to examine ourselves to see if we're getting better as we get older.
At every age.
At every age, yes. And we're always aging. So we have to examine ourselves, and if we're not getting better, then we better figure it out and work on it. The next sections say, Rebecca's sin only brought sorrow. She brought grief to Isaac. And it did. This brought grief to Isaac. Esau became defiant. He was very angry here. He was going to kill Jacob. Yes, he became defiant. This is another place where I'm like, it doesn't really tell us, but Jewish tradition has that Esau was a very evil man. That is not in the Bible, but when Jacob comes back, how does he treat him? He treats him well. He doesn't try to kill him. He doesn't go to war with him. You know, he doesn't want to accept the gifts that Jacob gives him, and
He falls down and bows to you.
yeah, I know. So, you know, some of these things don't quite. We don't see that in the biblical account of Esau. Now, in the New Testament, in Hebrews 12, the Bible calls Esau profane or godless for selling his birthright for a morsel of food. That's the only mention, really, that, you know, but this was what before all this and before he accepted Jacob back. And it says, you know, the Bible says a lot of times Esau I have hated, but Joseph I have loved. And that word hated there means loved less than Jacob. You know, it wasn't a hate. He didn't hate Esau. He loved Esau less than Jacob. And a lot of times,
Well, he did get angry enough that he said he was going to kill him.
yes, he did at that point. But he calmed down either 20 or 40 years later. He calmed down at some point.
There's still hope, because I asked Eric the other night if he had learned how to treat his brother, and he said, yes, I'm going to sell him.
Well, maybe he'll calm down 20 to 40 years. And then it says on the top of page 42, her sinful blunder separated her from her son. All right, this is true. The author states that she never saw him again. We do not know. It doesn't tell us. We have no idea. Because when Jacob comes back, we know that Isaac's alive, because he helps Esau bury him. And so when he comes back, he was still alive. It never mentions Rebekah again, except to say she was buried in the cave of Mamre with Abraham and Sarah. We don't know the end of the story on Rebekah. It just doesn't tell us. And it may very well have been the fact that Rebekah had died at this point. And one thing that points to that, and this is interesting too, she is not mentioned in the roll call of the faithful in Hebrews. You know, Sarah is, but Rebekah's not. That's, I don't know, kind of interesting to me. But the only other mention of her is when Jacob is dying and he says, take me back to that cave, Abraham and Sarah, where we buried, and he calls his mother Rebekah, where we buried Isaac. He said, take me back there. And so we know she's buried. We don't know when she died, or if they saw each other again. And it says he buried Leah there. Now, one thing which is very odd, if you'll turn to Genesis 35:8. You know how
35.
Genesis 35, verse 8. You know, you read. Sometimes you think, wow, I don't remember this, and this was one of those wows. Genesis 35:8. Now, Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried below Bethel under the terebinth tree. So the name of it was called Elon Bakuth. So her nurse died. It never tells us about Rebekah's death, but it tells us the nurse died. And some of what I read said for the nurse to have been transferred to the family in the patriarchal time of Jacob, that Rebekah most certainly was probably there. For the nurse not to be with Rebekah in Isaac's household, but to have gone to Jacob's household. And this may have been, we don't know, that nurse that came with her, you know, when she left to meet Isaac. So we just don't know for sure there. One thing that we do know for sure, we're going to finish this in 1 week. So, sorry. One thing we do know for sure is a mother should never encourage a child to sin to get ahead. And that's what she had done. We know that for sure. The foundation of a child when they leave home is built on what their parents have taught them. And if we've taught them to deceive to get ahead, if we've taught them to cheat or lie or be immodest or do things they shouldn't when they leave our home, that's the foundation that they have, and that will carry on with each generation into our children and our grandchildren. And it's so profound that we have to be careful by word or example to never lead them towards sin, which is what Rebecca did with Jacob. Any comments on that? Just sometimes when it seems so hard to not let our kids go along with the crowd, remember that's that foundation of not teaching them to, well, just go ahead so that you'll be popular or make the team or whatever it is, to not do that. It's hard to not do that. And we can buzz through these. We've got about 3 minutes. We can buzz through these questions, but who was sent to select a wife for Isaac?
A servant.
A servant. And we don't know who he was. All right. What did he do to ensure that he would select the right one? He prayed. He prayed to God. And sometimes it's real hard in a situation to stop and think, I'm going to pray that when I get there, before you get in that situation. And that's what he did. Since this one marriage which God helped to arrange why was it not a perfect pattern of marital success? This is all our marriages. Human imperfections. And I put selfishness. Rebecca wanted to make sure Jacob was the one that was chosen.
But again,
I know.
God said, God told her.
God told you that. I know that. I agree. And we're not told, that's what she was thinking. What prophecy was made concerning Rebecca's sons before they were born?
That the younger.
The older shall serve the younger. Yeah, I know that one. Who was Isaac's favorite? Esau. Who was Rebecca's favorite? Esau sold his birthright for food, a morsel. For the birthright to be valid, Jacob still needed the blessing. How did Jacob get the blessing from his father?
By pretending to be Esau.
He pretended to be Esau. Jacob's name actually means supplanter, which is to take the place of another by deceit. So that's what the name of Jacob means in the Hebrew back then. Why did Jacob have to leave home? Esau threatened to kill him. This one says, did Rebecca ever see her favorite son again? We don't know. I put 2 question marks there. I don't know. And the hoary head or age can be a crown of glory, but what is the condition specified? Anybody look that up? Proverbs 16:31. If it is found in the way of righteousness. Let me just give y'all a little side funny fact here. I had always read Old King James when I was a kid and all. And so on my SAT test, one of the vocabulary words was hoary, and I knew what it meant. I got that one because of all the Bible reading I does. Okay, we didn't know it, but she'll be teaching next week. And we'll move on to, Rachel and Leah.